I need your help. Seriously, I need your help explaining something, or at least discussing it, and I mean it because I am truly stumped. It came to a head this week with the indictment. As you know, I read the whole thing out loud for a podcast so that those who didn't have the time to do it could hear what's in it, and it is damning. Assuming the allegations bear out in a fair trial, it should end any doubt that reasonable people should have about re-electing Donald Trump, and it should convince those same people, wherever they sit on the political spectrum, that the next election isn't about right or left. It isn't about policy at all. It's just about liberty, equality, and democracy. For those who think what's unfolding now is just about January 6th, it's not. It's about everything that we should hold dear and free and caring as people. It's about the rights we stand to lose as a country. A woman with a complex or dangerous pregnancy, which is more likely to happen in America than in almost any other developed country, faces potential death after seeking medical care because of the fear that doctors and hospitals have about breaking the law, getting arrested, losing their license, and possibly going to jail. In Texas, Amanda Zarowski was denied a life-saving abortion because of the state's strict abortion laws. 3 days later, she developed a life-threatening infection and went into septic shock. She almost died. This is awfully close to what Margaret Atwood wrote about in The Handmaid's Tale in 1985. They laughed at the implausibility of her fiction then. Imagine a woman or a couple who did not intend to get pregnant because, yes, that still happens in America, where explicit sex education is increasingly frowned upon in Republican-led states and where some Republicans are making contraception harder to get. Imagine wanting an abortion, or your wife or your daughter or your sister wanting an abortion because they don't have the money to raise that child in the one major developed nation without universal health care and with a soaring cost of education. The cost of raising a child until the age of 18 is more than $250,000, according to statistics from the Brookings Institution. The median American wage is about $60,000. Yet, 2024 Republican candidates Donald Trump, Mike Pence, Asa Hutchinson, and Tim Scott have endorsed the idea of nationwide abortion restrictions. Imagine a nation which imported and captured and imported people against their will and kept them enslaved for 157 years before becoming an independent country, and then fought a civil war 85 years after independence in which 620,000 people died to end slavery, and then kept black people from enjoying their full civil and voting rights for another 100 years. Imagine all those years in which most black people could not begin to achieve equality in education, in housing, in employment, and certainly not in politics. Now imagine a country that has tried to right those wrongs with things as basic as affirmative action. Now imagine a Supreme Court perverted by a Republican Party bent on making sure that the deeply rooted racial wrongs of America's past go uncorrected. Actually, I'm wrong about that. It's not a party that wants the wrongs uncorrected. It's a party that wants the wrongs unlearned. It's a party that sometimes tacitly and sometimes explicitly supports the banning of books. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, they say, they being the Constitution of the United States of America. Tell me how the banning of books fits into this first of amendments. Imagine your gay son or daughter. I'm imagining mine. Not having the right to marry whom they love because at least one conservative Supreme Court justice who sits in the majority on our nation's highest court has floated that possibility. Imagine a child who does not identify with the gender to which they were born. Don't agree with it. Don't worry about what bathroom they get to use or what sports teams they get to play on. Just imagine it. Imagine all the anxiety and confusion and stress that comes with being a kid today. All the questions about fundamental identity. Add to that the stress of wondering if your own body is betraying you. Those children are being persecuted today. It will only get worse. Already, if you're trans in America, your likelihood of being bullied, attacked, and murdered are substantially statistically higher than that of the average American. Trans people are over 4 times more likely to be the victims of violent crime than cisgender people. That's according to a study by UCLA. And what about your vote? Your belief that your vote matters, your faith that your vote will be counted. That's the basis upon which our republic is grounded. The leading contender for the Republican Party actively worked to undermine that core belief, despite knowledge that there was no outcome determinative fraud in the 2020 election, an election his own hand-picked expert said was the safest in American history, an expert who was subsequently fired for saying that. And it's not just the leading contender. Only 4 of his Republican opponents have supported his prosecution to undermine this right. Nikki Haley said, quote, "We've got to move forward," which is a popular sentiment I hear often. Except we can't. We cannot move forward from consideration for the rights of our people. All of this is on the line. Democracy is on the line. I've heard all the criticisms of Joe Biden and the Democrats, that Joe Biden at 80 is a whopping 3 years older than Donald Trump, that he seems confused. Unless, of course, picking up the Humpty Dumpty that was NATO and putting it back on the wall to help Ukraine fight off an attack from an adversary 28 times its size is confused. I've heard that he's focused on being woke, but not on the economy. Despite 31 straight months of job gains, all of the jobs lost in the pandemic recovered, plus 5 million more, inflation down to a level that most global economists believe is sustainable, a stock market at its highest levels in history, unemployment at its lowest levels in history. As his predecessor used to say, more Americans are working now than ever before. You know what else we have more of than ever before? Heat. And yet another cable station, I won't call it a news station, which is a favorite of Republicans, has been airing segments for weeks about the so-called climate scam. Critical thinking humans are desperate to find solutions to global boiling, and they're still discussing whether or not it's a thing. Donald Trump famously said in office, quote, "We should be focused on magnificently clean and healthy air and not distracted by the expensive hoax that is global warming," end quote. Magnificently clean air, how's that working out for you? All of this is fact. In fact, I invite all the right-wing shows and trolls that like to monitor this show for accuracy to take every word of what I have just said and put it into ChatGPT or whatever counts as research for them these days and check me for accuracy. But that's not my ask of you. My ask of you is, how do I discuss this with people who won't listen? With people who don't watch this show or this network, who read the nonsense about both sides and who think it's Biden, not the GOP, who are weaponizing government? How do I convince them that they are, in fact, inextricably linked to the rights of all of us? How do I convince them not to vote their democracy away, not to vote the rights and the history and the futures of women and gay people and trans children and black people and the kids who just want to read books, not to vote their rights away just because they want less regulation and lower taxes? Help me with this.